can I now turn to this question which you've raised, and obviously I have to raise, and it's terribly important, about admissions policy and the so-called affirmative action program. It's a debate that's been going on at this university for some time, and I recall a debate that I chaired between yourself, late Professor Neville Alexander, and Professor Benatar. Where does the university stand on this issue now?
So we're right in the middle of the discussion, and we have been for 5 years, but...
Well, that's my problem. Sometimes you sound like the city of Cape Town, where things will get better, but God knows when.
The policy has been stable for the last 5 years, and currently it still is what it has been. In other words, it's a race-informed policy.
Yes. And you've been criticised for that.
And we criticised daily.
And not just from the right.
Yeah.
I mean, Professor Alexander was very critical of that in the debate we had.
And many of our own academics are as well. The council, because of the concern of wanting to check whether there are alternatives, appointed a commission chaired by Judge Craig Howie, and he reported back to the council at the end of last year. And that commission, which had Neville Alexander and some other academics on it, asked us to move away from a race-based policy. Now, the council didn't say, yes, we'll do that, and we put it to Senate, and nor did Senate say that. What Senate said was, well, let's explore how we might do that and see what the consequences are. But the bottom line, Senate said, is we must not move backwards from the amount of diversity that we've achieved. If we can find another way of doing it, we should do it. And the reason we think there's another way is because we think that race, one of the reasons we've used race and what race is telling us is it's a proxy for disadvantage to a significant measure. Most black people are poor and most poor people are black. There are exceptions, but it works as not a bad proxy. So what we've been doing over the last 2 years is we've been collecting information on our applicants that we hadn't collected before, such as have their parents got a university education or a higher tertiary education? Have their grandparents? Where do they live? What schools do they go to? Do they receive social grants like pension or childcare grants? What is what language were they brought up speaking at a very young age, as opposed to the language that they went to school in? Because we know that that creates a significant handicap or disadvantage if your mother speaks isiXhosa and you go to school and start learning English. And so these other measures of disadvantage are turning out to be quite useful. And we now proposed a model, which all the faculties are considering, which uses an index of disadvantage as a way of picking up, of selection. So your marks that you get at school are weighted by the disadvantage. So in other words, if we took 2 students with 70% from school, the assumption or the premise is that the student who's got 70% and has been to a township school and has had relatively disadvantaged background, parents didn't have higher education, that student probably has more potential, more motivated, better student, will turn out to be a better student than the student who has 70% coming from a privileged school and a privileged background. So what we then do is we weight that 70% upwards to maybe 77.
Are you moving, I'm listening to this very intently, and what I'm asking is, are you moving away from predominantly race-based to a class-based analysis?
Well, I can't say we're moving because the Senate and the faculty boards haven't signed off on that yet.
All right,
but they will
and I suppose you're not going to answer the question as to what your position is.
No, I'm happy to say my position.
What is your position?
We should move that way.
We should move to a class-based position.
No, my position is we should move to a hybrid position.
What's the hybrid mean?
That about 80% of the class is selected without regard to race. And I think that's possible using a weighting of disadvantage.
And the 20?
But it'll still be necessary to draw in about 20% of the class based on race, because otherwise
and why can't, and if you had adopted a class-based, bearing in mind that race and class are hugely overlaid in South Africa, what would be the difference of the result? And wouldn't you
mean if it was only class-based?
Yes.
Well, a couple of things would happen. Firstly,
and maybe more than 20%, a larger figure, I don't know.
Yeah, because, well, there are a couple of things. Firstly, there's not a small number of whites who get the benefit of a disadvantage measure, who are at Model C schools or at disadvantaged schools or whose parents don't have university education. So when you bring in that measure, you not only increase black students, you also increase white students against other white students and other black students who are better.
Really? In the pattern of South Africa?
Yeah, that's what our modelling is showing us.
Why is your modelling? I mean, I don't know what your assumptions of your model are.
Well, because there are still significant numbers of white students whose parents don't, or whose grandparents don't have a higher education.
But the criticism is if you kind of use race as the key factor, you're reproducing forms of identity which never get us into that non-racial component. If you're using something which in a sense really targets profound disadvantage, will you not be getting greater diversity?
No, it's not hard to get a great diversity by targeting profound disadvantage. Profoundly disadvantaged students don't pass and don't get through their degrees. We're not looking at people coming from at many people coming from remote rural schools or very poor township schools or very disadvantaged because they don't have the marks or the ability to get through
What I'm trying to probe is whether we're going to reproduce some kind of non-racial bourgeois approach to university community or whether we're actually going to really, through this system, promote the kind of diversity that you're talking about.
So interestingly, when you use race as the main measure, you get a bourgeois university. Because the black students that you recruit...
Is that what's happened up till now? For the 5 years that we've been faffing around?
Well, for many years before that.
Yeah, I accept that. But I'm only talking about the last 5 years because I haven't got another Vice-Chancellor in front of me, I've got you.
About two-thirds of our black students, or half to two-thirds of our black students would be classed as middle class. Is that the answer? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm just interested.
Okay.
How
bourgeois is our university?
Because a lot of critics say that to me, and they say that to you. You know that.
And in fact, what this does is it brings in more students who are disadvantaged, who are not bourgeois, because it's giving weight to a set of factors which was not being weighted before.
I'm sure there are people in the audience who'd like to ask about this. Before I turn to them, can I just talk about the staff, which I think maybe...
I just want to say one more thing.
Yeah, fine.
What important in the race debate is that race is not only a proxy for disadvantage. So race is a measure of disadvantage as well. In a society where racism is still prevalent and where race stereotypes are prevalent, people may perform differently because they are black and because of their expectations. And so it's not irrelevant, therefore, to include race as one of the factors. And I think that we would be, if the Senate does approve this, that we will be achieving the goal that the Council is seeking of moving away from a purely race-based policy, because 70% of the class will be selected on criteria that do not take account of race. But if we're not going to move backwards from the diversity issue...
No. And I don't want to be misconstrued. The questions are not coming from the point of view of those... There are bitter enders, and we're not talking about them. We're talking about how do we promote diversity in a way that the university, in a sense, reflects what the question put to me in the first place.